So, great to have you here, Charles.
Great to be here.
Welcome back. We will go and introduce myself. But we have had some evolution in our thinking and a new name for our congregation since the last time you guys were here, at least. We're the Faith+Works UU Congregation of Orange, formerly known as the First Unitarian Universalist Church of Essex County. Very good. So our acronym hasn't improved, but we like the new name more. And as everyone knows, we started the Hub some 8-9 years ago. I think folks are familiar in this room with the backstory. But the big question as the Hub took on its work in partnership with the many organizations that inhabit the space was, what's the role of the congregation? And this formulation of Faith+Works emerged. And he shared with us the verse in the book of James. Thank you. And so we've been having these Faith+Works talks monthly for since 2018, I think, which is pushing 6 years, which is kind of astonishing. Anyway, they've evolved. We've learned a lot of wonderful things. There have been some many profound talks given by many folks. It helps us understand the role of the congregation moving forward, and in particular, one of our associated ministers, soon maybe to have a fresh title, Edgar Rivera Colon, has helped us understand this space as a place for us of collective spiritual discernment in the context of the work that the various communities that are attached to this congregation do. And so it was almost 2 years ago now that we tried out this new name, and I think last year made it official. And we've had some very rich conversations, kind of anchored by Edgar's recurring once or twice a year sermons here. Anyway, so it's in that context that we have been actually particularly blessed since we changed the name to have a number of folks come back and talk to us, who talked to us in the early years of the Hub and the early years of this Faith+Works practice. So really thrilled to have Charles back to visit with us today. But before we get to that, we have to light the chalice. I'm going to invite Molly up to read some opening words and introduce Reverend Charles. So, Molly,
you're gonna light the chalice first?
I was thinking you could read the words as an.
Okay, cool. I'll read a poem while you light the chalice. Hi, Margot. Margot?
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Margo.
Hello, everyone.
So Margot was there on Zoom with us, and my mom are thinking through a book project they want to do called All Our Cousins, Our Cousins. Anyway, the premise is how we're all interrelated, like us and all living things, and we're all cousins. And then I came across this poem yesterday and sent it to my mom. It kind of seemed in that spirit, so I sent it to her, and then she said, will you read that tomorrow? And then I saw Doug on the porch, and he was like, I'm looking for opening words, and I was like, I have to. And this is called The Patience of Ordinary Things by Pat Schneider. It is a kind of love, is it not? How the cup holds the tea. How the chair stands sturdy and foursquare. How the floor receives the bottom of shoes or toes. How soles of feet know where they're supposed to be. I've been thinking about the patience of ordinary things. How clothes wait respectfully in closets, and soap dries quietly in the dish, and towels drink the wet from the skin of the back, and the lovely repetition of stairs. And what is more generous than a window?
Wow.
And so this is so cool to have Charles Loflin back. As some of you may or may not know, when Charles was studying to be a Unitarian minister, he came here for his internship, and it was really like our first year going at the Hub. And Charles used to hang out with all the Hub fellows, and it was just a delightful time, and Charles always had the best energy because he'd be like, I can help with that, like, and then he'd end up doing really cool stuff like bringing his disco ball to set up for our University of Orange 10th anniversary party. And I remember Amani, who's an artist, was a hub fellow at the time, and she was like, Charles is the best intern. And we were like, it's true. But also working on transcribing our early transcripts of Faith+Works and really helping us kind of co-create what this space has meant and can be, and has just been such a long time friend and colleague and co-creator and believer in the hub.
Yep.
And is now the executive director of New Jersey UU FaithAction, and we're so happy to have him here. So it's so nice. Thanks for being here.
So I know we're small in number, but you want to sing something first and get started? Can we do that?
Yeah.
Sure. All right. Do you know the song "Building Bridges"?
No.
Okay, so the word, it's really simple. It's building bridges between our divisions. I reach out to you, won't you reach out to me? With all of our voices and all of our visions, friends, we can make such sweet harmony. That's all it is. So you'll catch on, right? Just jump in as you can, right? So it's building bridges between our divisions. I reach out to you, reach out to me. With all of our voices and all of friends, we could make such
sweet harmony.
building bridges
Between our divisions.
Reach out to you, won't you
reach out to me?
All of our voices and all of our visions, we could make
such a sweet harmony.
building bridges between
our divisions.
Reach
out to you, and you reach out to me.
all of our voices and all
our visions,
we
could make such a sweet harmony.
Thank you for that. That is a Quaker tune, actually, that's in our UU hymnal, one I like a lot. Something haunting about it, I just really dig. It is a pleasure to be back amongst friends, a place that I think of fondly when I remember my own journey. I had such a good time here. Thank God it was before COVID. That's all I can say. I did my ministerial fellowship during COVID, and while it was a great learning experience, I don't ever want to do that again. Right? That was tough. And I am pleased because I've landed a ministerial job that really fits me. So I serve as executive director for UU FaithAction New Jersey. Now, if you don't know about the history of that, the UU congregations in the state, it was really Princeton that got this started. A group at Princeton had done a study and sort of survey to kind of figure out what people needed. And social justice, while it's always been part of the DNA of Unitarians and Universalists and Unitarian Universalists, it was still sort of nascent in terms of how we structurally organized it. And they were like, we need something at the state level. So they formed, because acronyms are so important, UULMNJ, which was the UU Legislative Ministries of New Jersey, right? And the idea was to have a voice particularly at the state legislature for UU values in the public square. It started with a number of congregations, and over the years that grew until I think at our high point we had 21 of the 23 congregations in the state that were part of the affiliation agreement. Went through a couple of leadership changes over the years. I think I am the third executive director, second full-time executive director. They went through a name change, so they went from UULMNJ to UU FaithAction New Jersey, which was an attempt to better sort of, capture in a single sentence what they were about. I love the Faith+Works nomenclature, because I think it's the same kind of thing, right? It really gets at the heart of exactly what you're talking about. But we work for statewide legislative advocacy. Not just that, but that's been our primary focus. We say that we have a threefold mission. So our mission is to educate ourselves and others on the social justice issues that are important, to advocate, particularly at the state legislative level, but also advocate at all levels, right, for the change that we want to see, and then to mobilize. We really want to be bringing people together in an effective way to make things happen. One of the best stories I always get to tell is, so we work in coalition with so many different groups. And I learned early on that when I said, oh, UU FaithAction, our coalition partners would go, oh yeah, you're the yellow shirt people who actually show up, right? And the more they said that, the more I thought, oh my God, that's a pretty good way to be known. A, because we're the yellow shirts, right? We were always the yellow shirts in the crowd. But the second part of that, you're the ones who actually show up. That was such a telling part for the organization over its history. Being there in coalition, showing up. Where things sort of really got on the map for UU FaithAction was the marriage equality movement in New Jersey. Right? At a time when religious organizations in particular were so hesitant about getting on board, we were the first religious organization in the state to testify in support of marriage equality. We were a leading voice in terms of moving that forward, and we were one of the groups behind the lawsuit that was brought against who was it, Christie at the time, right? Because we were like, this isn't right, and we were going to win that lawsuit. There was no doubt we were going to win that lawsuit, but at the same time, the Supreme Court finally saw the light of day, did the right thing, and so, marriage equality became the law of the land. Wow, to have a Supreme Court that does the right thing, wouldn't that be nice to be able to get back to? What a different world, right? But we think fondly of that marriage equality fight because it was a coming together of our values as Unitarian Universalists at a time when it really worked, right? Like to be on the forefront, to be on the edge, to be like, for so many religious organizations were like, the fact that you said that made it possible for us to say it too, So sometimes it's that vanguard position, the one who is willing to take the chance and lead the way. And I have to say that while that was a great success, there was so much celebration when the Supreme Court decision came down. There was a celebration of so many congregations for that. It's also been sort of a hard act to follow, right? Because it's not very often that you get this perfect confluence of all these events, right? Where our values particularly aligned, we were able to lead on an issue. It's not that we aren't out there and doing stuff in all these areas. We've done incredibly good work in so many areas over the year, but we don't quite have that same sort of emotional attachment that I think marriage equality had for Unitarian Universalists in the state. So in a way, that's sort of the peak of the organization, right? And often what I hear from congregations is a kind of nostalgia, I think, a dangerous institutional nostalgia, imagine that, of like, oh, why don't we have something like that, right? And the answer is because if issues were like that, they wouldn't be issues, right? We'd move on quickly towards doing so. Now, we don't always do that. There are some other issues that are that clear and from a moral perspective that we don't move on. I would argue reparations, why this country still is not willing to take seriously the issue of reparations is beyond me, right? But the truth is the problems that we face are very complex. And I would argue are getting more complex as we move ahead. And interestingly, these problems actually have a name in sociological and city planning services. They're referred to as wicked problems. So we're going to talk a little bit about what it means for a problem to be a wicked problem and how that impacts like what you need to do in order to get movement and work along those lines. So, if you go to the next slide. There we go. So, wicked problems are defined by three primary characteristics. They are unstructured, they are cross-cutting, and they are relentless. Okay, those are like the big picture items. What are we talking about? So, and I actually, at some point, I want to try to find the derivation of where the term came from. I don't know if someone on the team was from Boston, and wicked problems is what, but it's that sense, right? Wicked in the sense of exceptionally hard, right? So it's not just a problem, it's a deep, convoluted problem. And that's part of what wicked problems is trying to get to. We're talking about problems that are so big, so structural, that they're difficult to model in any real way, right? There's so many different inputs and outputs. When you try to make a change to something in a wicked problem, it's reactive and adaptive, right? So anything you do, the problem readjusts to, which makes it very, very difficult. Oftentimes, we not only cannot agree about what the solution to wicked problems would be, we can't even agree on what the definition of the wicked problem itself is. Like there's a lot of argument about what the actual problem is, right? Which resists change. It is interesting because there's a lot of written now about, there's sort of in Western thought, there's been this not complete myth, but we have been told, right, that science is the answer to everything. That if you follow the scientific method, sooner or later you're going to get to absolute truth, and then the absolute truth is going to tell you what to do, so everything is fine, right? So science would point the way. And yet we see when we get to wicked problems that the science isn't as helpful as we would want it to be because it becomes a weapon. Because the way science works, the way science doesn't decide something and then go out and prove it, right? Instead, science is like, well, let's set up an experiment and let's see what's going to happen. Let's pose a question and see. We don't create experiments to prove the answers that we want it to have, right? We create experiments to dig deeper into the problems. So the very nature of science is you're just not usually going to get to a place where you can say, this is the answer, right? You're going to get information, factual information, but it's not the holy grail that we once thought it was. Or, to say it another way, science often in non-wicked problems is a great answer, right? You can find out enough information and you're able to make a decision and move forward. But science alone is not the holy grail when it comes to these very, very wicked problems. And part of the dilemma that comes into this is like, what do you do in sort of and they call this, I love this, post-normal, right? And it's from a science perspective, but I'll argue we're living in a post-normal political world now as well. But they say that we're in a post-normal scientific worldview, in that science itself has become part of the argument, right? And so there's this jockeying of, well, I got my experts on my side, and the other side's got their experts, and we can confuse the situation entirely so that your average person doesn't know what to believe, and therefore thinks that there's reasonable doubt about an issue. So what are we talking about here? Something like climate change. Climate change is the classic wicked problem, right? So if you look at the science, the scientific field as a whole is saying, no, climate change is real. But there are also these sort of one-offs where things come up because science is constantly questioning its own assumptions, right? And so those who want to deny climate change can find science that backs enough of their view to sow the seeds of discord, right? Which is really, really where that comes into play. So the wicked problem of climate change is a big one. But also we could name the wicked problems, right? We could name a slew of them. Education in this country, a wicked problem, right? Like all the ins and outs, all the inputs that are part of trying to address that change. Income inequality. I mean, think about it. How there is no one fix, there is no one answer that's going to solve that problem. Another issue about, another characteristic of wicked problems is that seldom, if ever, is there going to be a once and done solution. So it's not like you're going to solve the problem once and forever it goes away, right? It's not like a vaccine, right? It's really not going to solve things in that particular way. So it requires constant adaptation in terms of how how all the pieces fit together. So all of that goes together, and like I said, among the wicked problems that we can easily identify, climate change, education, sustainability issues, income inequality, all of these things, the big social issues. And in fact, another interesting aspect of wicked problems is some will suggest that wicked problems are the result of successes in other things, right? So, for example, one of the things that exasperates climate change is the incredible success from one vantage point that we have in terms of what fossil fuels did for human innovation, right? So it allowed technology and industry to move forward really, really quickly. But those solutions actually start to contribute to the problems that we're experiencing now. But think about it with climate change, for example, right? Is there anyone in this room who doesn't know that we need to get off fossil fuels? You absolutely do. Right? We need to get off fossil fuels. Is there anyone in this room who thinks we can just flip a switch and stop using all fossil fuels at once and be okay? That actually cannot happen, right? Plastics can't exist without fossil fuel. And we have medical interventions that are saving millions of people's lives because of plastics, right? Are plastics causing a slew of other? Yeah, they absolutely are. But that's the kind of detail you get into with a wicked problem, right? So you might say, well, the solution is let's get off fossil fuels. Yeah, but how do you get off fossil fuels, right? Are we prepared for what would happen if we overnight made that switch? Because we cannot at the moment produce enough energy for our current needs without fossil fuels. That doesn't mean we can sit back and relax. And I want to say this too, because this is the thing about wicked problems. They are so convoluted and complex that they are meant to make us think there's nothing we can do, therefore we shouldn't try. And so it becomes a self-reinforcing situation, right? It leads to the idea the system is just like that and there's nothing we can do. Sound like a certain political system perhaps that we're living under, right? How many people have just decided it's not even worth trying because their voice doesn't matter and it isn't going to do anything. So dealing with these wicked problems is really the challenge. It's like how do we do that? And there are some emerging solutions that are cropping in terms of making things happen. And a couple of them that I just want to talk about really, really briefly. One is it's about making sure as many people are at the table as possible. So part of the difficulty, part of the idea of reinforcing the idea that a problem is unsolvable because it's so complex and it's so wicked is because the people we have at the tables making the decisions are bringing a perspective that is excluding so many people, right? So one of the first approaches towards solving wicked problems is making the circle wider, making sure that there's actual representation across the board from as many different people as possible. It means thinking creatively about solutions, right? Sometimes things seem impossible because we have in mind that there's a way that it has to be. It's very hard for us as human beings to envision something that doesn't already exist. It's really, really difficult to imagine something that you haven't experienced, to imagine something that can be. Another challenge of wicked problems is some of the solutions we're going to come up with are dangerous because as the problem gets very exasperated, we're going to have to make choices that by their nature limit other choices that we can make. In other words, there are some choices that we're going to make, and once we make those, we don't get a second shot, right? Climate change is a really good example because the closer we get to that tipping point, that 1.5 degrees Celsius, the closer we get to that, the fewer our options. And so for us as human beings, the tendency is Like, because think about that, to know that you might make a decision based on the best evidence that you have, right, and go forward, and it be the wrong decision. And if it's the wrong decision, you now have less time and less resources to be able to do something about it. So again, for so many people, you know, and I will say this, I think that's also a feature of white supremacy culture. I think the dominant white narrative has been you don't do anything until you know the results ahead of time. And so our inability to take chances, right, to be able to try something with a belief that we can adapt to it, that we have been enculturated to believe that isn't possible. That you have to know ahead of time exactly what the results are before you can move forward. If we wait for that kind of certainty, these problems are never going to get solved, right? So if we go to the next slide. So wicked problems present the need for three particular challenges. At least this is what I'm borrowing from authors that I read on the subject, but I do think it's interesting. They're saying that the particular challenges of confronting wicked problems is that we need solutions that are more effective, right? Because one of the things about wicked problems is if you propose something in a system like that and it doesn't have a huge impact or doesn't even have a measurable impact, then, you know, what do? Let's take an example of climate change, right? What do we do about climate change? Well, we hear all of you, need to recycle all the time. But even if you recycle 100% of the time, which you can't do, by the way, because most of the stuff that you're putting in that bin isn't actually recyclable, like it cannot be recycled, those numbers don't mean anything. Those were a marketing attempt to get people to buy into the idea of recycling. But even if you all did the recycling, the actual polluters who are creating the plastics to begin with, you're not going to make a dent in, right? Now, if we say that too loudly in certain circles, we're afraid people are going to stop recycling, which even though it isn't a complete solution, is going to have to be part of the solution. And so even though it doesn't work right now that things can truly be recycled, we still need people to start somewhere. But boy, have we shifted the onus of the problem. We've shifted it onto the individual, right? And off of the hands of those who created the problem to begin with. So the solutions that we provide aren't often effective enough. Should we be composting? Absolutely. Is composting going to save the planet? Not by itself. Should we be eating less meat? Yep. Absolutely. That our agricultural and food supply system is part of the problem. But if we all go vegan tomorrow, is that alone going to solve the problem? It is not. Right? So we need more effective solutions. Here's another big one. We actually need some accountability, right? These require some way to be able to do this. Again, part of the problem of climate change. How do you say to a third world country, and I use that term very carefully because I don't like the term at all. Let's say developing country, right? A developing country that gets to the point where their economy is growing, their industry is growing, and you say to them, you can't use coal because coal is so bad for the environment. And yet, who is saying that to them? Countries that have built their power and dominance in the world because they used coal. How do you say to someone else, we did it, we caused so much of the problem, but now you can't because we've decided that we know better now, you know? And how are you going to hold them accountable anyway? In a world where there is no authority we can appeal to that's going to make everyone come on board, right? So that's part of the difficulty too. How do we build systems of accountability so that the solutions we do propose can actually do anything? And boy, this is a challenge for us now, right? More democracy. Because the whole process, honestly, if you look at these wicked problems and you look at who the decision makers are, it's built in hierarchy, it's usually patriarchy, it's systems of power and oppression that have been in place for so long, right? There aren't enough voices at the table to make that happen. By the way, if you want to hear or a podcast I will recommend that has some just wonderful insights about democracy. On Being, Krista Tippett, back in July, did an interview with Adrienne Marie Brown, who is my hero, by the way. She's like my patron guru at the moment, because I think everything that comes out of her mouth is just brilliant. But in that interview, she said, she was talking about the move to authoritarianism that's happened in this country and trying to explain why that happened, how did that happen. And she said something, and I think this is so true. She's like, well, just think about it. People don't actually live in democratic processes. They've not been practicing democratic processes for 50 years. And Krista was like, what are you talking about? She's like, well, think about family units. How many family units actually function like a democracy? Actually use democratic values? How many neighborhoods use democratic values, right? How many of our small groups and school systems and public utilities use democratic values? We have been practicing authoritarianism for the last 50 years. So people have become accustomed to authoritarianism. And so one of the things that Adrienne Marie Brown says, if you want to save democracy, practice democracy. And not in the big spaces, start in the small spaces. Really get democratic in how you interact in your small groups, because that's the way you save democracy for the long term. I thought it was brilliant. I hadn't thought about it, but until she said that, I thought about, you know what, that's absolutely true. In almost every circle I've been in my entire life, it has not been democratic. And the idea that somehow the government would be democratic, that it would be the one exception to the rule when everything else wasn't, makes a lot of sense.
Why does she limit it like 50 years?
Well, I say 50 years. I mean, you could argue, you probably could easily argue that maybe we've never been as democratic as we think we were, right? I suspect, though, that there was a time when you saw democracy practiced in a more real way. I hear stories, especially of, I think of some stories I've heard about life in communist China, for example, where often families, the individual family units, were practicing these very democratic approaches, which is sort of what kept the dream alive, even in authoritarian states, right? But I was just really struck by the idea that because we have assumed that we have a democracy that we live under, that it flows down. And in reality, I don't think that's true. Let's go to the next slide. So, these are going to be a list of the things I think we need to do in order to tackle some of these wicked problems, right? It's not a comprehensive list, but I'm tying it in as a religious professional, as a Unitarian Universalist. These are sort of like the values I think we have that can equip us for dealing with some of the wicked problems that we face. The first one I listed is coalition. What I mean by that is all of our work needs to be in coalition. If you're working alone, you're not doing the work. The more we work in coalition, the better off we are. And the wider those coalitions are, the better off we are. The idea, and again, this is American culture, right? This sort of false sense of self-reliance, right? And being able to do everything yourself, it's killing us. It's absolutely killing us. I believe that wicked problems especially demand for us to work in bigger coalitions. Secondly, I would say that the work requires joy. So here's the thing. I want your righteous anger because I know it will motivate you to do something. If I can get you riled up about an issue, your righteous anger I may be able to get you to go vote in one election. Or I may be able to get you to make one phone call, or I may be able to get you to come to one march. But I'm not going to be able to sustain a movement with your righteous anger. If I don't find a way to find joy in the process of doing the work, nothing else is going to matter, right? We have to remember that, especially when we're volunteer-led organizations. Like, yes, we are moved by the urgency to get stuff done, by the need to really make a difference, but ultimately, if we're not fostering joy, it's not going to make any change, right? we have to find a way to make the work enjoyable. It has to be joyful. And it can naturally be, because you all have experienced joy in doing this kind of work because of the relationships that you build while you're doing it. But how often have those happened sort of in spite of the work that you're being asked to do, instead of recognizing that the joy is actually part of the work itself? Trust. Adrienne Marie Brown again, she says this, I have it on my wall. It's a mantra that I live by. You can only move at the speed of trust. That's very irritating. Because I'm one of those people that wants to get something done. I want to get it done yesterday. If I see something that's wrong, I want to get it fixed. I want to put together the campaign. I want to see the change. I want to be able to define in the group, in the community activist group, getting together, what does our change look like? I want to be able to hit those bullet points, and then I want to be able to go back to them and say, we got those bullet points, we can now celebrate the win. That's not how real life works. Not that those things aren't important, not that they aren't really, really crucial, but we actually only move at the speed of trust. And the speed of trust is sometimes slow. It is sometimes generational. It can be so infuriating, but it is the only way to do this work. We can only move at the speed at which we're building trust. This one I put on here, I should take it off because I don't follow this advice, but it's up there because if I put it on the list, maybe I'll begin to follow it a little bit. You cannot do this work if you don't rest from doing this work. That may sound very zen in some ways, but so many people get burned out because they don't give themselves permission to rest. We build systems like that, right? And I'm executive director of an organization where I'm constantly calling people out. I'm asking them to do more and more and more. How hard is it to take the position to say, I need you to take some time off? You're burnt out. Don't do that. Say no. Let your no be a say. I don't want you to go away forever, right? I don't want you to disappear because, oh, I've had it with those people, not doing that anymore, no. But you have to take a little bit of rest. And interestingly, if we structured it, if we took it more regularly, then it wouldn't be as big a deal, right? If our institutions can't survive if we're off for a week, then there's something wrong with our institutions. The work requires rest. The work requires resources. And I do mean all resources here. First, it requires our full human resources. It requires our full humanity. You cannot show up to do this change work, the work of tackling wicked problems, by just bringing part of yourself. You gotta bring everything. You gotta bring all of your biases. You've gotta bring all of your self-understanding and misunderstanding to the work. All of your resources have to be there. And a challenge for all of us, resources also include money. They just absolutely do. As much as we might want to talk about, oh, we can do this without, we can do this or as little as possible, we still need resources. We absolutely do. Which means we need to spend time convincing people that the resources that they're giving, that the resources that they're making available are being used as efficiently as possible, right? But it's part of it. I need everyone's resources on board if we're going to make change. And it's not a one and done, right? The same way that we're not going to have a one and done solution, this is an ongoing, sustaining issue. So at UU FaithAction, one of the things we're trying to tell our supporters now is, you know, it's wonderful that you give us a donation once a year, right? That's great. But what we really need are sustaining givers so that we have some expectation of what our income stream is going to be. Because do you know how much energy we waste wondering where the budget's going to be, waiting to see when it comes in, not being able to make decisions long term, because all I know is what this year is going to be. How am I ever going to plan out for 3 years or 5 years or 10 years? How are those visions ever going to happen if I'm constantly worrying about the resources that we need just to get by now? It's all those resources. I say the work requires transformation. You will be changed by the work that you do. And if you're not willing to be changed by the work you do, then the work probably isn't the right place for you to be, right? And I point out that this is one of our big UU values, right? With all the Article 2 revisions, transformation is one of the big values that we're pushing. And that in our experiences, transformation should be part of what happens. But I think it's important for us to tell people that, to be upfront about it, right? That we're asking them to do something that's going to impact them. It's truly going to transform. It can be transformation for the better, although there's no guarantee of that. But it is going to be transformation. You are going to be changed by the work. And the last one I have on here is love. This is me putting on my theological hat. This is what I love about the Article 2 bylaw rewrite, right? Because for the first time ever in Unitarian Universalist history, we have a profound theological statement that justifies everything we do, which is love is at the center of everything. That's what we're now saying. Love is at the center of everything. Now, we need to make it true, right? Which isn't as easy as just passing the bylaws. But if love is at the center, it makes all the difference. And I want to point this out because I think this is so important when we talk about wicked problems. So let me tell you the truth. The people on the other side, I sometimes have contempt for them. I sometimes look down my nose and I'm like, how could you be so stupid as to believe that? I sometimes think, well, we have to get this done in spite of them. You know what that isn't? That isn't love. That isn't love. You know, you reference the verse from James, the book of James, which is where Faith+Works comes in, right? Because the verse goes something like, faith without works is dead. The writer says, if you're going to show me your faith, I need to see it. I need to see it in action in terms of what happens. Love is the same way. I mean, and if that's really at the center of everything, even when we are in direct conflict, and we will be in direct conflict with people sometimes who want to do us harm, there's still a way to do the work out of love. Not that I have to love someone who's trying to hurt me. I'm not saying that. That's a whole other issue, right? That's a psychological place we don't want to be. But the why always has to go back to love, being done in a spirit of love with big problems. So that's in essence what we've got here. What I want to do though is take a really quick moment just to give you a really top level, super quick breakdown of the specific work we're doing at UU FaithAction right now in our 4 justice areas. So if we can go to the next slide. We're going to talk about criminal justice reform, go to the next piece here. So one of the things we've tried to do this year is we've tried to get really particular, making simple our sort of platform for what it is we're trying to work on. So we have 4 justice areas. We have criminal justice reform, we have environmental justice, we have immigration justice, and we have reproductive justice. Those are the 4 task forces we have. Doesn't mean we don't take issues and positions on other things, we do. But these are the ongoing groups that have sort of been the focus for our work. In our criminal justice reform, our platform this year is to work on these 4 things. These are the programs that we have going. The first is to end solitary confinement. So you may recall, this is referred to, if you see this in the news, the acronym ICARA, which is isolated confinement in the prisons. Okay, all the data says it's torture. That's simply what it is. It's absolute torture. It does nothing positive. It is just a way of torturing other human beings. And it is illegal in New Jersey. We passed laws that are supposed to have gotten rid of isolated confinement. Guess what? Isolated confinement is still happening. Sometimes it's happening because they called it something different, right? They think if they change the name, they keep doing the same thing. And the excuse coming from the Department of Corrections is, we don't have enough money to follow the law. What? It makes no sense. We're working hard to actually end solitary confinement. A report just came out on the state of incarcerated confinement in the New Jersey prison systems. It's available on our website. There's actually action happening there. We have We actually have at the Department of Corrections a voice that is open to change for the first time in a long time. The Ombudsman's Office is a great starting place for us, but there's work to be done here. I think there's a real possibility of getting some movement on this, so this is why I'm pushing it. Second is rehabilitative release for seniors. You may have heard this referred to in the past as geriatric parole, but basically this is for folks who have been incarcerated for, most of them, for almost their entire lives, right? They have reached a certain age and, in almost all cases, a certain condition of health where the cost of incarcerating them because of the health care is actually ridiculously high, and they're getting terrible health coverage in the prison system. The data says the risk of recidivism for these people is zero. They don't say near zero, they say it is zero. Like, that's how statistically accurate it is. These are people who there is no risk of recidivism. There are other states that have done this in the last few years, and we want New Jersey to do it too. This is going to be a hard one to do because our leadership is not on board. And that whole idea of being, hard on crime is something that gets these people reelected. But it is the right thing to do. It's definitely something that we need to be working on. Here's another one, free phone calls. You may not know this, but incarcerated people are gouged. To be able to make phone calls, they have to pay exorbitant amounts of money. Exorbitant amounts of money, despite the fact that the data shows that those who are incarcerated, if they stay connected to their family systems while they're incarcerated, the recidivism rate once they're out plummets, and they have an easier time reintegrating into society as a whole, right? And phone calls don't cost anything anymore, right? Think about what you pay per phone call. You don't, right? You don't. This is dumb. This is just stupid, and it's oppressive. So we're really working on that. There's also a summit coming up, a Community and Correction Summit. It's going to be happening in January of 2025 at Monmouth University. We are a co-sponsor for this. Latino Action Network is really the group that's behind this. They did this summit, do you remember when, Jane? It's been a long time. 10 years ago, something like that. This will center those who are most impacted. So we're excited about what those possibilities are. Sorry, I'll move quicker. Next slide. This is going to be environmental justice. And next slide. So our issues here are clean energy. 100% clean energy is what we're saying, because there are bills in the legislature right now. They're playing all kinds of games. They're trying to define clean natural gas. Doesn't exist. There is no such thing as clean natural gas. And they're trying to put all this money into alternative energy methods, all of which continue to cause all sorts of pollution. So we're really fighting for this. There is legislation currently on the table that would create a super fund for climate cleanup that would hold the polluters responsible for the damage they've been doing over the last 30 years. We'd put that money into a super fund that would be used for climate resilience and for expanding public transportation and things along those lines. I'll talk to you more about that, because if you're on our email list, I can make sure that you get the petition to be able to sign that, because we not only do we have to get the legislature on board, we have to get the governor. There is a green amendment. This has been a thing that's been building in a number of states over the last few years. This would enshrine into the New Jersey Constitution that every citizen is entitled to clean air and clean water. It would make a huge legal difference in terms of what people could do in terms of going after the state when it's not following the law. Again, it's an uphill battle in New Jersey. We've been trying to do this for several years, but it continues to be a priority. We're also working in these three areas. There aren't bills that are as groundbreaking in these, but we are looking at agriculture and food security, because there are food deserts here in New Jersey, right? All over the place. What can we do to help those out? Forestry continues to be a concern. for us in the state as well as education. Specifically, what we're talking about here is the curriculum for the state has to be looked at every so often. There's nothing in the current curriculum about climate change. Nothing. So we'd like to see some educational standards that apply there. Let's go to the next slide. This will be immigration justice. For immigration justice, you're just going to see one thing here. We just got this bill reintroduced. It's called the New Jersey Immigrant Trust Act. We think there's a chance this could actually happen. We really need to get on top of it and make it happen. Here's what's going on. Basically, the immigrant community across the state often doesn't take advantage of the resources they are entitled to for fear that by doing so, they may get reported to ICE and deported, right? So they often will not make use of public libraries or public assistance or any sort of thing that they are legally entitled to simply for fear that it's going to lead to that. Now, our Attorney General passed the Immigrant Trust Directive, what didn't pass, implemented the Immigrant Trust Directive. So the Attorney General has already said, oh, we agree, right? So the current guidance is, if you're a local municipality, you're not supposed to ask people about their immigration status. Unless it's absolutely required in order to give them the services, you're not supposed to ask in New Jersey. You're not supposed to voluntarily cooperate with ICE. Because immigration enforcement is a federal issue, it's not a state issue. So we're saying don't help, that's not our job to help. So that's come from the Attorney General, that's the ruling. Here's the problem. As soon as there's a different Attorney General under a different administration, that directive can go away overnight. So all we're trying to do is we're trying to pass into legislation what's in that current directive, which means we need to act fast, because if you're not aware, we will be heading into gubernatorial elections, because New Jersey sets its gubernatorial election in the off years, right? So if it's a presidential election, we know there's a gubernatorial election coming. And everything could go sideways really, really quickly. Everyone in this room remembers what life was like under a Christie administration. No one wants to go back there, at least I hope not. And you should know, or I always ask this question, in the modern era, how has New Jersey always voted in a gubernatorial race? Always, except for one time. Whoever wins the national presidential election, the opposite party wins the gubernatorial race. That has happened in every single modern election except for last year, where Phil Murphy barely won. So we are a contrarian state. I'm raising this alarm bell all over the place because it's not just in immigration justice. This is also going to have a huge impact on trans kids and what's happening in the school systems, because that's coming next. And if there is a change in the gubernatorial positioning, there's going to be a change in the approach to that. So it's coming. We definitely will be about it. But happy to share more about the New Jersey Immigrant Trust Act, give you our own resources. Last one is our Reproductive Justice Task Force. So these are the areas that we're working in. We're always working to make sure that abortion access is available in the state. You might think, hey, we're a safe state, right? Just because it's legal doesn't mean that it's accessible, especially to folks who hold marginalized identities, right? So we tried to get passed last year an omni package that was a Reproductive Equity Act that would have made sure that more of that got in there. It didn't happen. Those bills are now being reintroduced this year. We hope there's going to be some movement. Maternal health continues to be a major thing. This is a shockingly awful statistic, but in New Jersey, if you are a Black woman giving birth, the chances that you're going to have huge health impacts are astronomical. And it does not matter what your education level is, what your income level is, or what your zip code is. Statistically, women of color do not receive the same treatment in the medical system as white women. It is awful, awful, awful. We continue to fight for sexuality education. This has been a normal place for us, an obvious place for us with our OWL commitment over the years. But this has also shown up because of our commitment to trying to get sexual education curriculum passed, we have been tied into what's been happening in school boards. So where the trans attacks have happened and where the book banning attacks have happened, it's been our reproductive justice task force that already had the infrastructure in place to respond to those. So that's why they're continuing to do that, because they're sort of dialed in to what's happening on all of those levels. So even though it, LGBTQ justice might not, when you think about that, you're like, well, why is that under reproductive justice? It's just where we are now, right, in terms of where the infrastructure is to help make that happen. I always want to point this out, though. I say LGBTQ plus justice, but in New Jersey, the problem is trans justice. Like, it is disproportionately a problem with trans justice. And this is another place where I think, like the Marriage Equality Act, I think this is an alignment of our values with the need to be out front on the vanguard of an issue. Like, we are poised to be the religious movement that comes out and really, really supports this. Also want to share quickly, there is a movement that's happening that's UU adjacent. It's called Pink Haven, Project Pink Haven. And it is an attempt, where necessary, to relocate trans families with trans folk, from states where they are under direct threat into less hostile states. There is now a family in New Jersey that is living in New Jersey that was fleeing a red state. The Project Pink Haven helped with that. And here's the thing, the scary thing. It doesn't matter which way the election goes, this is still going to be a problem. Especially with this Supreme Court, and especially with the laws that are being passed. There's danger here. Danger, danger, danger. A lot of these deep red states are passing laws about restricting transportation, right? The transportation of underage individuals across state lines. And it's being applied because of how their constitutions read to apply to an unborn fetus. That if you cross a state line to receive any sort of reproductive care, they say you are transporting a human being. And they're holding people accountable for it. So more coming on that, more to be done. And the very last slide, then we're done. I'll shut up. I'm sorry. You know me. If you're not on our mailing list, here's a QR code. You just make sure that we've got that's really the key. We don't send out anything unsolicited, so unless you have signed up to be on our mailing list, you don't get the information. I promise we don't spam people all the time. It's becoming a hard world here because people aren't reading their emails. I mean, you're probably finding that in your own lives. So it's becoming harder and harder to actually communicate with people when you need to, but some of these things become very timely. Right? So like the opportunities for taking action, those windows open up unexpectedly. So being able to get to people quickly, we certainly want to make all that happen. I'm sorry for just running on and on and on, but I'm passionate about this work. I really, really am. And I'm grateful for the support that you've all given UU FaithAction over the years. And I'm so delighted that you have me here to share some of this.
Great. Well, it's 5:07, so rather than doing any Q&A in here, we have some tea next door, so we can do some informal chit-chat. Before we do that, I want to share about what's happening on Thursday.
I'll just share what's happening on Thursday.
On Wednesday.
Wednesday is, wait,
Talking about lunch.
24th of October is what I'm sharing. Now you got me confused.
Sorry.
Okay, on Thursday, 24th. You may remember that Tom Henshaw was here for We Talk 20, and he gave out books by this guy named Greg Jarrell, who he's worked with in Charlotte, North Carolina. And Greg Jarrell is a reverend there who became very interested in what was the role of white churches in urban renewal, and sort of what was the theology of the white. And he's written a fascinating book called Our Trespasses, and he's coming to visit. And so we're having sort of a lunch and learn between 11 and 2 here, and there as well. It's cool.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. And we were trying to send, we sort of had this idea late, that people know.
Take care.
If you send me the information, I can send it out to our middle.
yeah, so everybody's welcome, and, the book is great, so it should be interesting.
Thanks, Mindy. We also have our next Faith+Works is in November 24th, the Sunday before Thanksgiving, and it'll be Anaya Jenkins, our hub board member, who will be talking about something, who knows what.
Who's
Konaya.
Oh, Correct.
And then December 15th, I think, is our candlelight communion with also TV programming. We don't know, sort of lay-led sharing of reflections, maybe a little more organ music.
That'd be great.
So, is there anything else anyone wants to announce before we blow the candle out?
I just wanted to mention that on Wednesday we're having a board appreciation event at Darcy Hall's home, and it's for the board members of both the Hub and Faith+Works, and some of the folks who have been working on our Buildings and Grounds Committee and helping to get things moving forward to get our capital campaign off the ground and to do all the things that we're trying to do to live up to our role in the community. So we want to thank those folks.
Thanks
for doing that.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks, Charles.
Thank you, Charles. I have a question about the juvenile, or rather the criminal justice reform.
Yeah.
Is there a part of that that addresses specifically juvenile justice?
So that's an interesting question. So, because we generally classify that under the umbrella term restorative justice, right? And there was a restoration justice team that came out of our criminal justice team. So there was a bill passed just a couple of years ago that would create restorative justice alternatives for folks. That group has since fallen apart. So our criminal justice reform group is looking at the possibility of taking on some of that restorative justice challenge.
Right.